Rain hit the porch as I opened the door. She stood there, soaked and shaking. "Thomas, please, I made a mistake." "No, Elaine, you made a choice." I didn't yell. I didn't slam the door. I just looked at her. The woman who once wore my ring, the one who tore my world apart, and for the first time I felt nothing. The man she left behind no longer existed. "You think silence means weakness," I told her. "But silence is what taught me how to start over." The door closed gently between us, and that's when I realized something. By the time she came back to explain, I had already built a life she could never destroy again. "Hello there, my friend. I'm Thomas, and this is a story I never thought I'd tell. I live out in Wyoming, where mornings smell like coffee and pine, and the nights can make a man remember every mistake he ever made. Life's quieter now, but quiet doesn't mean empty. It means I've had time to see things for what they really are." Before I go on, I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, has anyone ever dismissed you because of your age, or made you feel like your time was over? I read those comments every night, and sometimes they remind me I'm not the only one still standing after life tried to knock me down. From the outside, my life looked simple, maybe even picture perfect. Folks around town used to say Elaine and I were the kind of couple that made marriage look easy. We'd show up at Sunday service, hold hands on the porch swing, wave to neighbors walking their dogs. They saw smiles, laughter, and a little white-painted house that glowed warm against the evening light. What they didn't see was how slowly that light began to dim. Elaine came into my life when I had almost nothing but a dream and a pickup that coughed more than it ran. She worked at the local diner, a place with cracked red booths and the smell of burnt coffee that somehow felt like home. She had that laugh that made people turn their heads, that kind of confidence that made you believe she could never break a promise. The first time she called me Tom, it sounded like a promise in itself. I believed her every word. We built our world piece by piece. Elaine handled the books for my repair shop when I finally opened it, and she made that house feel like more than four walls. I'd fix tractors and plows all day, come home greasy and tired, and she'd already have supper on the stove. We didn't have children, though not for lack of trying. She said she was fine with that, said we were enough for each other. Maybe that's where I first noticed the cracks, those quiet nights when she'd stare at the empty hallway a little too long. We had friends who became like family. Joe and Marlene from next door. They'd come over for barbecues every other weekend. Marlene used to say, "Tom, you hit the jackpot with that woman." I'd just smile and nod, thinking she was right. Joe and I talked work and weather. The women would talk everything else. It was Elaine who drew people in, not me. I was the man behind the hammer. She was the voice everyone remembered. And then there was Mark, Joe's younger cousin. He'd moved into town 2 years after we did, working odd jobs, borrowing tools, borrowing time. He had that easy grin that made people trust him too quickly. Elaine said he was harmless, just friendly. I took her word for it, because I wanted to believe my world was as steady as it looked from the outside. When we'd all gather in the backyard, it looked like something out of a postcard. The grill smoking, laughter rolling across the fence, the women teasing the men for burning the food again. But underneath those easy smiles, something quieter started shifting. I began to notice how Elaine's laughter changed pitch when Mark was around, how her eyes followed him when she thought I wasn't looking. It wasn't obvious, not yet, but sometimes love doesn't die with a bang. It fades with small glances that last a second too long. My sister Margaret came by one afternoon and pulled me aside. "Tom," she whispered, "Elaine seems distracted lately. Everything all right between you two?" I brushed it off, told her Elaine was just tired from running the books and the house. But deep down, I knew Margaret wasn't wrong. Elaine's attention was slipping, piece by piece, like sand through fingers. Even our dog Baxter seemed to sense it. He used to follow her everywhere, tail wagging, waiting for scraps from the kitchen. But in those last few months, he stopped sitting by her chair. He'd stay near me in the garage instead, quiet, like he knew who was still holding things together. Neighbors still waved when they drove by, and everyone thought we were fine. They didn't hear the silence inside the house after dinner. They didn't see the empty spot at the table when she started eating late, or the way she'd step outside to get some air and stay gone for an hour. They didn't feel the distance that grows invisible before it becomes undeniable. From the outside, I was the lucky man who had everything. A wife, a home, a small business, and peace. But from the inside, I was a man standing in the middle of his own life, watching the walls shift, knowing something was coming. I just didn't know what. And maybe that's the hardest part about betrayal. It doesn't always look like shouting or slammed doors. Sometimes it looks like someone smiling at you while quietly stepping away. When I think back on it now, the part that hurts the most isn't that she left. It's that I spent half my life making sure she'd never have a reason to. I came from nothing. My father was a factory man who worked himself into silence, and my mother stretched every dollar like it was her last. When I met Elaine, I swore I'd give her the kind of life my parents never had. She said she didn't care about money, that she just wanted stability. I took that as a promise. So I worked. Harder than I thought a man could. In the early years, we didn't have much, just a one-bedroom apartment with thin walls and a leaky roof. But she made that space glow. I'd get home from a 12-hour shift, hands cracked from grease and cold steel, and she'd be sitting cross-legged on the couch, humming some song from the radio, a candle burning between us like hope. Back then, I believed that kind of love could outlast anything. When the garage started doing better, I saved every cent. I turned down fishing trips, skipped nights out with the guys. Every extra dollar went toward a down payment for the house she wanted, a small place on the edge of town with a view of the hills. I built the deck with my own hands, even carved our initials under the railing. For us, I told her. She kissed my cheek and said, for always. I should have known always meant something different to her. There were years when we couldn't afford much. I remember one winter when the heater broke, and I spent 3 nights sleeping in the garage fixing the parts by hand. My fingers froze, but I kept going because she said, I don't want to move back to my mother's place. That was enough. I worked until the machine roared back to life. She wrapped her arms around me that night and said, "You're my hero." I believed her. When her mother fell ill, I used our savings to cover hospital bills without hesitation. Elaine cried, said I was too generous, but that's what love was to me. Sacrifice. Giving, even when no one's keeping score. I bought her a car when the business really took off. Not new, but good enough to make her proud. I remember how she smiled that day, flashing the keys to our neighbors. "My husband got me this," she said. I stood there, greasy hands in my pockets, feeling like I'd finally made good on my promise. What I didn't realize was that car would later become the thing that carried her away from me. Every nail in that house, every drop of sweat on those garage floors, it all came from a place of love. I built her comfort, her security, her peace. I thought love was something you built with effort, not charm. But charm, that's what Mark had. The kind of smile that doesn't need to work for anything because it knows someone else already did. There were nights when Elaine would sit beside me, watching me patch up invoices, and she'd touch my arm and say, "You'll burn yourself out, Tom." I'd smile and tell her, if I don't do it, who will? I didn't realize how prophetic those words would become, because when everything finally fell apart, I was still the only one fixing what was left. It's strange how the memories that used to keep you warm can turn cold. I can't look at that house now without seeing the hours I'll never get back. The mornings I left before sunrise, the dinners I missed, the small ways I thought I was proving my love. She said she wanted a man who could build a future. I became one. And when I finally did, she walked away to chase someone who never lifted a hammer. People say betrayal stings because of lies. But no, lies fade. What really burns is knowing the sacrifices you made became the very foundation someone else stood on when they left you behind. And when I think about her now, I realize something I couldn't see then. It started small. They always do. Betrayal doesn't arrive with thunder. It slips in quietly, wearing a familiar face. One evening, I came home early from the shop. I'd closed up just before sunset, wanted to surprise Elaine with dinner from that new place by Main Street. She always said she missed the days when I used to bring her little things. I thought maybe that would make her smile again. When I walked in, the kitchen light was off. She was sitting at the table, scrolling through her phone, a glass of wine half empty. Her plate was clean. She'd already eaten. You didn't wait for me? I asked, trying to sound light. She didn't look up. You said you'd be late again. I can't keep waiting around all night for you, Tom. I remember standing there, holding that paper bag of food that was still warm, smelling of grilled steak and rosemary. For a second, I wanted to tell her why I'd come home early. But something in her tone stopped me. It wasn't anger. It was indifference. The kind that freezes you mid-sentence. Sorry, I said quietly. Next time I'll call. Yeah, she murmured, tapping her phone. Do that. She didn't even ask what I'd brought. I sat alone at the counter, listening to the fork scrape against her empty plate as she rinsed it in the sink. Every sound felt like a reminder this wasn't our rhythm anymore. We used to laugh through burnt dinners and cheap wine. Now it felt like I was dining with a stranger. A few days later, it happened again. We were at Joe and Marlene's barbecue. Mark was there, standing by the grill, turning the ribs like he owned the place. Elaine was beside him, laughing. Real laughter, the kind I hadn't heard in months. When I walked over, she turned to me and said loud enough for everyone to hear, Tom, maybe let Mark handle it this time. He actually knows how not to burn the meat. Everyone laughed. Just a small moment, harmless on the surface. But I felt it. The jab underneath the humor. A little twist of the knife wrapped in a smile. I laughed too. I had to. That's what men do when they're trying to protect what's left of their pride. Guess I'll take notes, I said. But inside, I could feel something crumble. That night when we got home, she went straight to bed. No apology. No good night. I sat in the dark living room for a long time, listening to the old clock tick against the wall. Every tick felt heavier than the last. I thought about how she looked at him, how her eyes lit up when he spoke. The same eyes that once looked at me like I hung the moon. It wasn't what she said that hurt most. It was what she didn't need to say anymore. Just building a home. I was building an exit for someone who was already halfway out the door. It started small. They always do. Betrayal doesn't arrive with thunder. It slips in quietly, wearing a familiar face. One evening, I came home early from the shop. I'd closed up just before sunset. Wanted to surprise Elaine with dinner from that new place by Main Street. She always said she missed the days when I used to bring her little things. I thought maybe that would make her smile again. When I walked in, the kitchen light was off. She was sitting at the table, scrolling through her phone, a glass of wine half empty. Her plate was clean. She'd already eaten. You didn't wait for me? I asked, trying to sound light. She didn't look up. You said you'd be late again. I can't keep waiting around all night for you, Tom. I remember standing there, holding that paper bag of food that was still warm, smelling of grilled steak and rosemary. For a second, I wanted to tell her why I'd come home early, but something in her tone stopped me. It wasn't anger, it was indifference. The kind that freezes you mid-sentence. Sorry, I said quietly. Next time I'll call. Yeah, she murmured, tapping her phone. Do that. She didn't even ask what I'd brought. I sat alone at the counter, listening to the fork scrape against her empty plate as she rinsed it in the sink. Every sound felt like a reminder. This wasn't our rhythm anymore. We used to laugh through burnt dinners and cheap wine. Now it felt like I was dining with a stranger. A few days later, it happened again. We were at Joe and Marlene's barbecue. Mark was there, standing by the grill, turning the ribs like he owned the place. Elaine was beside him, laughing. Real laughter, the kind I hadn't heard in months. When I walked over, she turned to me and said loud enough for everyone to hear, Tom, maybe let Mark handle it this time. He actually knows how not to burn the meat. Everyone laughed, just a small moment, harmless on the surface. But I felt it. The jab underneath the humor. A little twist of the knife wrapped in a smile. I laughed too. I had to. That's what men do when they're trying to protect what's left of their pride. Guess I'll take notes, I said. But inside, I could feel something crumble. That night, when we got home, she went straight to bed. No apology. No good night. I sat in the dark living room for a long time, listening to the old clock tick against the wall. Every tick felt heavier than the last. I thought about how she looked at him, how her eyes lit up when he spoke. The same eyes that once looked at me like I hung the moon. It wasn't what she said that hurt most. It was what she didn't need to say anymore. In that silence, I made myself a promise. I wouldn't confront her. Not yet. Sometimes silence tells you more than words ever could, and I wanted to see how far hers would go. I smiled to myself in the dark, but it wasn't joy. It was that cold kind of realization, the one that whispers, remember this moment. Because even if I forgave her later, I knew I'd never forget that laugh. And the truth is, I didn't. I remember every word, every smirk, every sound of that crowd laughing at my expense. That was the night I stopped being her fool. I just hadn't said it out loud yet. After that barbecue, things didn't explode, they eroded, piece by piece. The kind of slow breaking that happens when someone stops seeing you as part of their future and starts treating you like furniture from their past. Elaine began pushing limits, small ones at first. She started eating dinner without me more often, said she didn't want cold food. Then, she stopped setting a plate for me at all. I'd come home from the shop, find the table cleared, the light above it dimmed. Sometimes she'd leave a note, leftovers in the fridge. I'd read it standing in that same quiet kitchen, wondering when paper became easier than conversation. She started dressing differently too. Not in the way women do when they feel good, but in that careful way, like she was trying to impress someone new. Expensive perfume. New shoes I'd never seen before. Just treating myself, she said when I asked. But she'd never been one for vanity. One night, she invited Mark over. She said he was helping her look at some investments. I told her it didn't sit right with me. She laughed and said, "Tom, not everything's about you." That line stung more than I let her see. When they sat at the table, I could tell from her tone that she wanted me to leave. The way she turned her body toward him, keeping her hand near his on the table, made my stomach twist. I walked out to the porch, pretending to check the storm door. From there, I could hear their voices through the open window, hers soft, his lower, that familiar confidence dripping off every word. "You deserve better, Elaine," he said. "I just need someone who understands me," she replied. I froze. My chest burned, but I didn't walk back in. I couldn't, not yet. I needed to hear how deep the hole went. A week later, she came home with a new phone and new jewelry. When I asked about it, she said, "Mark's been helping me with some financial stuff." I nodded, pretending not to notice the guilt in her eyes. But I saw it. I just chose to store it away for later. Then came the dinner that changed everything. We were sitting at the table, plates untouched. I told her I'd finally paid off the land behind our property, another 2 acres I dreamed of using for a small orchard. She smirked and said, "What for?" "You're almost 70, Tom. You really think you'll live long enough to see that grow?" I stared at her. For a second, I thought maybe she'd take it back, but she just took another sip of wine and looked away. That was the first time I realized she didn't see me as her husband anymore. She saw me as a wall between her and whatever freedom she thought was waiting. 2 days later, I caught her in my office. She said she was just cleaning, but my desk drawers were open, the ones where I kept the deed and the business papers. When she saw me in the doorway, she froze, then smiled. "You never let me help with this stuff," she said. "Because it's not your kind of work," I replied. She didn't answer, just closed the drawer slowly and walked out like nothing happened. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those papers, about how she'd once begged me to put her name on the title. I never did. My father once told me, "Don't sign something you're not sure you'll want to read again later." I didn't understand what he meant until now. The following weeks felt like a chess game I hadn't agreed to play. She'd make subtle jabs about money, about how Mark's been investing in real property, real wealth. She'd talk about smart people who didn't waste their lives on small-town businesses. I said nothing, just listened. Each insult, each slight, each moment she looked at me like I was in her way. I let it sink in quietly, because by then I knew silence was my only weapon. What she didn't realize was that while she was testing how far she could push, I was learning how much I could endure without breaking. And that's the dangerous thing about a quiet man. The world mistakes his silence for surrender. They never see that he's already planning the moment when everything will turn. You can tell when something shifts in a house. It's not always the sound of arguing, it's the absence of it. The way footsteps start falling softer, the way doors close just a little too carefully, like guilt has learned how to tiptoe. It started one night when I came home earlier than usual. The shop was quiet that day. My back had been aching, so I locked up before sundown. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed the living room light flick off. I stood there for a moment, watching the curtains move. When I walked inside, Elaine was sitting on the couch with her phone in her lap, pretending to read a magazine. "You home early," she said. "Yeah, thought I'd surprise you." "Well, I was just about to shower." Her voice cracked on that last word. That's when I noticed her phone still glowing behind the magazine, the name Mark on the screen. I said nothing, just nodded and walked to the kitchen. But something inside me clicked, like a lock turning for the first time. Over the next few days, the signs multiplied. A credit card statement with charges from a hotel in the next town over. She said it was for a spa weekend with friends. When I asked which friends, she stumbled, said, "You wouldn't know them." I didn't argue. I just made a copy of the receipt and folded it neatly into my pocket. Then came the missing cash. Small amounts at first, from the shop's petty drawer, then from the safe I kept in the garage. I checked twice, then 3 times. Each time a little more gone. I'd never locked that safe before. I did now. A week later, I overheard her on the phone while I was fixing the heater in the hallway. She didn't know I was home. Her voice was low but sharp. "I can't just take it, Mark. He'll notice." Silence, then softer. I said, "I'll handle it. Stop pushing me." I froze, wrench in hand, my breath held like it might make me disappear. She hung up a few seconds later, then called out, "Tom? You home?" I answered from the other room, pretending I hadn't heard a word. "Yeah, just finishing the heater." That night, I couldn't look at her. I just sat on my side of the bed, staring at the shadows on the ceiling. My mind ran through every conversation we'd ever had about trust, about honesty, about how we promised to never hide things from each other. Now I realized how foolish that promise sounded when it's only kept by one person. The next day, I checked the mail before she could. There was a letter from the bank, her name on it, not mine. A new joint account I didn't authorize. I didn't open it right away. I placed it in my jacket pocket and waited until I was alone in the shop that evening. The letter was short but enough. She transferred money from our savings into an account with her name and another listed as M. Foster. Mark Foster. That name sat on the page like a wound. I stared at it for a long time before folding it again, carefully, like it might shatter if I touched it wrong. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Because part of me still wanted to believe there was a reason, some misunderstanding that could make it all make sense. But the other part, the quieter part, already knew. This wasn't confusion, it was calculation. She started locking her phone, turning it face down whenever I entered the room. I caught her whispering once on the porch, said she was talking to her sister. But when I called that sister later that week, she hadn't spoken to Elaine in months. Even the dog acted different. Baxter barked one night at the gate around midnight. I went outside and saw tire marks leading away down the gravel road. The porch light flickered in the wind, and something in my gut told me it wasn't just a late visitor. The next morning, Elaine looked exhausted, her hair messy, makeup still smudged. She poured coffee without meeting my eyes. "Rough night?" I asked. "Couldn't sleep," she said. "You weren't here to try." She froze for a second, then smiled that cold little smile, the kind people wear when they're pretending not to be cornered. That was the morning I started keeping notes. Dates, times, receipts, a quiet list of moments that didn't add up. Because I knew something she didn't. A man who's been lied to enough doesn't just hear words, he hears what's missing between them. And deep down, I could already feel the proof coming, like thunder behind the mountains. It hadn't hit yet, but it was building. I didn't know when or how, but I knew this silence, my silence, wasn't going to stay silent for long. It happened on a Tuesday morning. She was in the shower, her phone buzzing on the nightstand. A message flashed across the screen before it locked. "Meet me at the cabin. Same time." I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. That was all the proof I'd been waiting for. Later that day, she left her purse by the counter while grabbing groceries from the car. The zipper was half open. Inside was a folded envelope, a lease agreement for a small cabin 2 towns over. The names on it read Elaine Parker and Mark Foster. I stared at it for a long moment, every part of me burning, then quietly placed it back exactly where I found it. When she walked back in, I smiled like nothing had changed. "Long drive today?" I asked. Just errands, she said. I nodded, calm as ever, because now I knew. And what she didn't know was that from that day forward, every word she spoke was being recorded in the silence she'd taught me to master. Now let me ask you something, my friend. What would you have done if you found that letter? If you held proof that the person you built your whole world around was building a secret one behind your back? Would you have confronted them right there? Demanded the truth? Shouted until the walls cracked? Or would you have done what I did, stayed silent, collected every detail, and waited for the right moment? Tell me in the comments. I want to know, because sometimes silence feels like weakness. But in the right hands, it becomes a weapon. It was a Sunday evening when the storm finally reached my doorstep. Joe and Marlene invited us to dinner, said it had been too long since we'd all sat together. I almost said no, but something told me to go. Sometimes you have to walk straight into the fire just to see who stands beside you when it burns. Elaine dressed like it was a celebration. New dress, new perfume, same lies. Mark was there too. Joe said he came to help with the grill. I just nodded and took my seat across from them. The air felt thick, heavy with things unsaid. Dinner started normal enough. Laughter, small talk, that fake kind of cheer people use to cover cracks. But then Elaine spoke. Loud, confident. You know, she said, smiling toward Joe, Mark's been helping me figure out some business investments. He's really been a blessing. I set my fork down. That so? She smiled, that same practiced smile. Not everyone can afford to sit still forever, Tom. Some of us are thinking about the future. There it was, the jab in front of everyone. A line meant to make me look small. The future? I said quietly. Whose future are we talking about? Her smile faltered. You're being paranoid again, she said. Mark's a friend. Mark chuckled, but he couldn't meet my eyes. His hand twitched under the table. That's when I knew he felt it too. The weight of a truth waiting to fall. I leaned back, folded my napkin, and gave a small nod. If he's a friend, then you should be careful with your friends. Some have a habit of taking things that don't belong to them. Silence. The whole table froze. You could hear the clock ticking in the hall. Marlene shifted uncomfortably. Joe cleared his throat, trying to change the subject. But I wasn't angry, not even a little. I just watched Elaine's face, how the color drained from it, how she gripped her wine glass like it could steady her lie. After dinner, she tried to speak to me in the car. You embarrassed me back there. I said less than you deserved, I answered calmly. The drive home was silent, but it wasn't the kind of silence that hurts anymore. It was the kind that builds. The kind that says something's coming. Because I'd seen enough. I didn't need a scene. I just needed time. And time, as she was about to learn, was the one thing I had more of than she ever would. A few days after that dinner, I left the envelope, the cabin lease, right where she'd find it. On the kitchen table, under her coffee mug. Nothing else. No note, no accusation. Just truth waiting to breathe. When I came home from the shop that evening, she was standing there frozen, eyes wide, the paper trembling in her hand. Where did you get this? She whispered. I set my jacket on the chair and looked at her like I was studying a stranger. You left it where I could see it. She opened her mouth to argue but couldn't. Her face was pale, her jaw tight, fingers clutching that proof like it might burn through her skin. Tom? It's not what it looks like, she said, voice shaking. Then you should be relieved, I replied. She stammered, tried to smile, but I saw the panic flicker behind her eyes. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse her. I didn't even touch the papers. We'll talk later, I said quietly, after I speak to my lawyer. That line hit her harder than shouting ever could. She froze, eyes darting to me, trying to read how much I really knew. But I didn't give her that satisfaction. I walked past her, calm and deliberate, leaving her in that kitchen, surrounded by her own secrets. She didn't know it yet, but I wasn't showing all my cards. I was only letting her see the edge of one, just enough to make her realize the game was already changing. 2 weeks later, we sat across from each other in my lawyer's office. She'd been quiet ever since the envelope incident, pretending things were fine, pretending she still had control. But I'd been preparing for this moment long before she realized the ground under her feet was gone. The lawyer slid 2 folders across the table. One for me, one for her. She looked confused. What is this? Estate update, I said. Just routine paperwork. Her fingers trembled as she flipped it open. At first she smiled, the kind of smile that hides panic, until her eyes caught the line that erased her name from everything. The house, the land, the savings, all transferred into a trust for a local charity and my sister's children. "You can't do this," she hissed. "Already did," I said calmly. "You remember those signatures I had you witness months ago? You thought they were for a business renewal? They weren't." She went pale. "You tricked me." "No," I said softly. "I just listened when you stopped talking." She stood up, shaking, knocking over the folder. A flash drive slid out from inside. My lawyer picked it up and pressed play. Her voice filled the room, clear, desperate, recorded from her phone the night she thought I was asleep. "Mark, we'll get the money. He never checks the accounts. I just need him to sign the transfer, then we're done." The air went still. She froze, staring at the speaker, then at me. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. "That's what you meant by done?" I asked quietly. "You weren't lying." She sank into the chair, eyes wet, breathing fast. I didn't move, didn't gloat, didn't raise my voice. I just gathered my papers and stood. "You wanted freedom," I said. "Now you've got it, just not the kind you imagined." When I walked out, she didn't follow. I heard the sound of her sobbing fade behind me as the office door closed. That was the day my silence finally spoke, and it said everything she needed to hear. The room went dead silent. My lawyer's eyes stayed on the papers. Elaine's hands shook as she tried to gather what was left of her pride. For once, there were no excuses, no charm, no pretending, just the sound of truth echoing louder than any argument ever could. She looked at me, eyes red, searching for mercy I didn't owe. I simply said, "You built this ending yourself." Then I turned and walked out. No shouting, no gloating, just peace. Because sometimes justice doesn't need noise, only the strength to finally walk away. If life's taught me anything, it's this. Loyalty means nothing to the wrong heart. You can give someone your name, your home, your trust, but if they crave more than honesty, they'll trade it all for a lie. Respect isn't earned through promises, it's proven through presence. And patience. Real patience isn't waiting for someone to change. It's knowing when to stop waiting altogether. Thank you for staying with me through this story, my friend. It means more than you know. Every time one of you listens, it reminds me that pain can still turn into purpose, that even heartbreak can teach something worth passing on. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever given your trust to someone who didn't value it? What did you learn when the truth finally came out? Tell me down in the comments. I read every one of them. If this story spoke to you, share it with someone who needs a little reminder that healing doesn't always mean going back. Sometimes it means moving forward. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories from this old heart of mine. Until next time, my friend, stay strong, stay wise, stay blessed.